Jordan, so you studied law at the University of Michigan. You worked as a lawyer on Wall Street, and you've been kidnapped not once, but twice. You're the creator of three wildly successful podcasts, and your latest show gets 250,000 plus downloads per episode. You've established yourself as the foremost authority on networking and charm, and you've been referred to as the Larry King of podcasting. Now, before we get into anything else, so you were kidnapped twice. Tell us what happened there.
Yeah, so the short version of those is I'm 40 now, so to put it in context, the first time was when I was 20. I went to Mexico, and I lived in Mexico City, and I got in a fake taxi. But it's not like, I wouldn't say like, you can't go to Mexico, there's too many fake taxis. There are other reasons that make Mexico dangerous, I guess, now. But back then, fake taxis were a thing. And bear in mind, I lived in like a low-income area in Mexico City, age 20, no real income, working for a nonprofit, got in a fake taxi, and then the guy tried to literally take me for a ride. Back then, there were no smartphones, so he couldn't call for his compadres to come and join him in the car. He had to stop and then threaten to get out and say, like, he's just looking for directions. And I was like, no, I know what you're going to do. Also, I wasn't distracted scrolling through Instagram or reading Reddit in the car because there weren't smartphones. So I was looking out the window going, this is definitely the wrong way. He doesn't know that I live here. He thinks I'm like a tourist who got lost. So there was a lot of situational awareness that I wonder if now I would have had the same results. I think I probably would have been farting around on my phone and looked up and gone, where am I? And then possibly he would have just gotten out without saying anything, and I would have just been like, oh, well, scroll, you know? And so I wonder if I'd like be around to tell the tale now. And then the second time, I worked for the Department of Defense in I had a scholarship of sorts from the Department of Defense, and I worked in another country called Serbia, not Siberia, but former Yugoslavia. And I love Serbia. It's awesome. I have friends there. I just talked to them this morning, so I'm not a hater. A lot of people get really upset. But I was essentially arrested, but not really, by their internal security service, which was just like these drunk, methed out war criminals from Bosnia. And they got me and my friend, and we ended up hanging out with them, quote unquote, and then they took us to another place. They started drinking even more, and then I eventually took the opportunity. They were so discombobulated that I took the opportunity to escape. And it made front page news in the country at the time, and then they recalled the story saying that we made the whole thing up, which is funny because they didn't get that story from us when they printed it. They got it from the other guys, and then they said, oh, our sources made it all up. And I'm like, your sources were the guys that did this. So they changed their story. But anyway, so it became this whole thing, and we ended up getting a letter of apology from the foreign minister that we could only read in the embassy, not take a copy with us, which was highly suspect. And so the whole thing was just kind of a debacle. And it made me realize that, like, I was young then, too. I was 24. So it's one of those things where you kind of go, oh, you know, I'm not immortal or invincible, and you know he's mortal. I meant invincible. And also, it's not always just going to work out and be okay all the time. And I'm pretty lucky that this was all that happened. And it was just a really weird situation because you kind of, you know, you think like, oh, authorities aren't always on your side, but then you really experience it and you go, oh my gosh, this is what it feels like to just be powerless, to just not be able to do anything. You don't control yourself at all, your own agency at all. And then I remember a lot of my Serbian friends being like, hey man, don't feel bad. This happens to us too. And we're from here. We live here. If the government, you know, decides to screw with you, you just can't do anything. And when Slobodan Milosevic was in charge, if you remember that name, if his people decided to mess with you, you just couldn't do anything about it. You were just screwed. You just had to deal with it. And so they were just like, yeah, now you kind of understand what it was like to live here in the 90s. And I thought like, wow, I'm pretty lucky that I can just like buy a ticket and go home, or I can like run to the U.S. Embassy, you know, and cry to the security liaison officer, the regional security officer they're called, you know, that kind of thing. So it really does make you go like, holy crap, I'm pretty lucky to live where I live in the United States.
Yeah, and especially when you're younger and you have that moment, because you know when you're younger you just think, I'm gonna last forever, you know,
Yeah.
I'm indestructible,
Right?
And it's just, and I totally agree with you. You know, within arm's reach is probably your cell phone. My cell phone's within arm's reach, and it's like I probably, especially in a taxi, a long ride, I would have been looking at my phone and would have probably never got those cues. And yeah, so I had to ask you about that. I thought that was just so crazy. I was like, well, did he learn from, the first one? What happened with the second?
Slow learner. Yeah.
Uh, let's talk about you went to University of Michigan and you studied law. And it seems like here you really started to experiment with ways to become more socially competent. And through that, you started an old pickup show. So tell us a little bit about that and how you approached that learning journey.
So I originally started teaching networking. Well, first of all, I got an internship on Wall Street as a lawyer. So I was working there and I thought, oh, how do I make it to the top? The people who brought in business for the firm were the people who made it to the top. That was what I learned from one of the partners. So I was like, I got to learn how to bring in business. How the hell do I do that? And, it became a game of networking. And then I started taking classes on networking. But the classes were things like, it was like Dale Carnegie, good, but not great, not good enough for advanced level. Everybody in the class was kind of like, I'm afraid to talk in front of rooms full of people. And I was thinking, man, if I can't bring in a $1 million deal from Goldman Sachs or Lehman Brothers, it's not because I didn't look them in the eye and have a firm handshake. This is like, there's something else going on here, and I'm not going to learn it from a guy wearing a sweater vest teaching a class at the YMCA on Tuesday nights. Not to be a jerk about it, but that's the cold truth, So I need to figure out what it is that is really going on here. So I started studying psychology, learning from really good salespeople, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road, like intelligence agents and salespeople and things like that, because those people, that's how they make their living or live and die based on that stuff, not like somebody who read a book and mastered the curriculum inside the book. So I worked on that stuff, and I started teaching this networking class at the University of Michigan Law School for young lawyers, and nobody cared. It was like 3 women would show up, and I'd go like, how come nobody wants to learn this? And the women actually had really good insight. They told me that women back 15 years ago in law school were saying, we need to learn this because a lot of what's on finance, Wall Street, financial stuff, law, it can be kind of an old boys club. That's changing, but we really need to learn how to like network, develop relationships, connections, stick together. And a lot of the guys were like, I don't care about connections and relationships. I'm going to go work on Wall Street and make a bunch of money, and I don't need anybody else. And that's not true for men or for women, but for guys, we just didn't have to worry as much about it. And women knew that they were starting off at the time, especially with the disadvantage, and that relationships were going to be more important. And honestly, women are better at developing and maintaining relationships as well, period, just generally from my observation, because it's either genetic or, hardwired, or they get more practice early on. That's kind of up for debate as to why, but that's what I noticed anecdotally as well for that class. So then I realized, look, if I've got 3 or 4 women showing up, they occasionally bring a friend or two, let's just do this at a bar because it's air conditioned. We can get something to drink. It doesn't have to be in 99 degrees, Hutchins Hall at University of Michigan, sweating our faces off. So we started doing it at a bar, and then they would bring other women, and we'd start observing people who were on dates or not on dates, and I'd be breaking down body language, and they would sort of play along, and that became kind of what we had focused on, is nonverbal communication. And then this started to get really fun. It was like a game. So then the women started bringing a lot of their friends, some of them not lawyers, didn't even matter who. And then eventually guys were like, so you're here 2-3 nights a week, always with different women. What's the story? And I'm like, oh, I'm teaching a class. So they're like, oh, I want to be in this class. So I started getting guys showing up, and the guys would show up and they would be like, this is so interesting. I want to know all about this. So then it became more of a dating class and less of a networking class. And that was kind of how this whole thing started, because I started to burn my talks and conversations to CDs, give away the CDs. And then I started charging for the CDs because people weren't bringing them back. And then I realized I'm not going to get rich off these CDs. The classes are more lucrative because I can charge people who are not part of the law school to come to the classes. So I started to give away these CDs and sell these CDs. And then it just started to get popular. And I said, I'm sick of carrying these things around. I keep burning them. I'm spending 4 hours a night burning CDs because it takes like 40 minutes each, right? I need to put these files on the internet. And someone said, well, podcasting is this brand new thing. It's probably about a year old. You can upload your files to the internet and people can download the MP3s. And I said, wow, what is this sorcery? So I uploaded the files, and that was the beginning of the podcast. But it really was like about networking, and then it just immediately pivoted to dating, because I realized no 20-something is like, how do I network and develop relationships? They're just not thinking about that. They think they don't need it, and even if they do think they need it, if they're anything like me, they think, I'm going to need this when I'm 50. not when I'm 25.
Right. And what's interesting is nowadays those emotional intelligence skills, those empathy and soft skills are so valuable. It seems like everyone has the hard skills, but the social cues, the emotional intelligence is just, it's just something everyone's looking for. And I remember listening to a different interview you did, and I think you were like one of 800 for
Yeah.
podcasts. And now
Yeah.
I don't even know what the number is.
There's a
And
million and a half podcasts now.
yeah,
Literally.
that's just incredible. So I'd love for you to tell our audience that story of the first time you had someone in a different country.
Yeah. Yeah, so we put the files online thinking, all right, we're gonna print up little like homemade business cards with like inkjet, put in some cardstock, print off the thing with the URL on it that was like whatever.com. I don't even remember what it was. Let's say jordanharbinger.com, but it wasn't that back then. And leave them in bathrooms at bars and hand them out to people that are curious and tell, that way we'll get more people who are listening to what we're doing. And it's funny because I still have listeners that found those cards a bajillion years ago in Ann Arbor and like still listen to the Jordan Harbinger Show and write in. And, many of them I've met in real life now and we're friends. It's really, really funny, the longevity of podcasting. But I started to do that, and then I would look at this old thing that I'm sure doesn't exist anymore, this old website called Site Meter, and it was like how many hits you got. I don't even know what hits are. I guess they're not unique. So I guess it's just page views. I'm not sure quite how those differentiate now.
Just refresh.
Yeah, and you could refresh and you'd get another hit. So I would look at the hits every day, and it would be like 24, and I was like, oh my God, 24 people found this, and then I looked at this. They added a world map to Site Meter, and I went, "Oh, okay. So let's see where these people are around us. Like maybe somebody told somebody else about this, or like lives far away, and we'll see like where they are in Ann Arbor or where they are in southeastern Michigan." And I remember looking and being like, "South Africa? Who's in Gauteng, South Africa? What is that?" I'm Googling it, or Yahooing it probably at the time, and looking it up and going like, what? So I remember just being so excited and going, I don't get it. Is that a glitch? I wrote to Site Meter. I said, hey, something's wrong. I've got people in Canada. I've got people, but there's no way they would have found it. It's not, how would they have found it? And they're like, no. These are the IP addresses where people are downloading your stuff. And I just thought like, okay. So on the show, which wasn't even a show at that point, I said, hey, are you listening to us and you're not in Ann Arbor, Michigan? Where are you? And somebody from Toronto would write in. And then somebody would say, yeah, I'm a game warden in South Africa. I take your podcasts, I download them, I burn them to CDs, and I play them in my Jeep as I'm driving around this game reserve park or whatever. And I was just thinking, this is incredible because I was burning these to CDs and uploaded them, and now you're taking the file and downloading it. Bear in mind, it's not as amazing now as it was back then. Nobody had any media online, first of all, barely any. There certainly weren't downloadable radio shows that were international in scope, really. And then to be able to show that there was somebody in another country listening to what we were doing and like writing in and emailing with us was incredible. So to be able to get media to the other side of the world immediately was absolutely bonkers. There was nothing like it. There was no YouTube. Social media didn't exist. Facebook was limited to Harvard, Yale, Michigan, Virginia, whatever it was, those .edus, the select few .edus. So there weren't networks like this that existed. So that was mind-blowing, and I went, okay, I don't exactly know what's going on here, but the fact that this has international listeners, we are onto something. There's something here that is sort of magical, and this is the beginning of either a business or just like a really cool concept. I'm going to track this. And, I think it's clear now that we were really like gazing into the future of the internet at that point.
Yeah, and what's so interesting is nowadays it seems like it's the next podcast boom. Where like I think maybe with what's happening with coronavirus and things like that, I think people are looking for different opportunities. And what's crazy is the reach and how it can act as your whole flywheel for content production. We're doing video that's going to go on YouTube. It's going on Spotify, Apple, everything, and you saw that early. So you had your first 2 podcasts, and then you launched the Jordan Harbinger Show. and it started in 2018, I think, and you've released over 400 episodes. I know you've done probably close to 1,000 interviews. Well, probably way more now.
Yeah. Probably more, but definitely 1,000 interviews at least, I would say. And in the last 14 years. And the Jordan Harbinger Show, the current iteration of what we're doing now, is, we're on, I think 423 came out today. So whenever you're listening to this, 423 came out today. And we started in, this iteration was January 2018. Our initial, so to avoid confusion, the first podcast I released was December 2006. Yeah, 2006.
Unreal. That shows consistency, and you built a following through just that compounded consistent efforts. And so you've talked to professional athletes, celebrities, and you've talked to science and tech specialists. What's your main interest on who's going to come on the show? Is it just anyone that's entertaining? Like, what are you looking for currently?
Yeah. Good question. So I really do follow my own interests to a certain point, but I also follow things that are not necessarily only my own interests. I try to get interested in things when they're presented to me. So if someone says, hey, this is the former national security advisor, I'm not like, wow, I'm fascinated, but I'm like, this is probably somebody who's going to be interesting. Let me figure out how to get interested. Not that hard to get interested in that, by the way. But other times even if I am interested, I can't do it. Like if it's just too niche and there's no sort of through line of psychology or human performance, like there's no lesson maybe that the audience is going to take away from it. I can't do it, right? If I had a favorite sport, which I don't necessarily have, you can't just sort of fanboy your favorite whoever because it's a podcast. I really do keep the audience in mind. I always keep the audience in mind. What are they going to get from this? It's always about what are they going to get from this? Because if I waste an hour of my time, that's one thing. Imagine wasting 250,000 hours of other people's time. That's kind of horrifying. Just the damage done to like human productivity in that week is not fair to the world, as grandiose as that may seem. So I try to be really consistent, but of course I try to also make sure that whatever I'm doing is going to help the audience. There's going to be something there for it. But yeah, essentially I do just follow my own interests. If something is about travel in North Korea, I'm like, sign me up. Where do we talk about that? People will be interested in this. National security advisor? Yeah, let's talk about it. I'll be interested in this. Late great Kobe Bryant? Yeah, let's do it. I'll make it interesting. I'm sure it'll be great. But even if I can nerd out on something, I do have to think, is this going to be worth it for 250,000 people to spend an hour listening to? And you don't come up with a yes all the time.
I think that is, if I could ring a bell, I think that's just fire for any marketing tactic. It's about them. It's you're the Yoda, you're the mentor, and you're trying to provide value to the audience. And what's funny is before our conversation, I was watching a video of how to give a great interview, and you just nailed it. You were talking about the audience, and it just resonated with me. But so for our audience listening, personal injury attorneys, so niche. They're serving prospects who they don't know when an individual is going to get hurt. What would be a reason that they should consider podcasting?
Well, let's start with the reason not to podcast. Do not podcast to make money. It's probably the worst way to make money on the internet. I'm exaggerating, but probably not by much. It's really hard to monetize. You need a huge following in order to monetize it. Look, if you're a YouTuber and you're only getting 500 streams, whatever, plays per video, you're making like $1, right, off that or something, $1.50, not much, but you'll make that. Nobody's even going to sell an ad on your show until you start hitting 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 downloads per episode consistently. And then you're going to make money off of that, but it's not enough to pay the bills. Like it's enough to pay for your hosting bill or something like that, or your microphone, or, but you're not even paying your rent off of that. Probably. It depends how often you release. So it's not great. You can use it as lead gen to sell courses and things like that, of course, but I'm just talking about like purely from an ad model perspective. It's not a great way to just sort of instantly get rich quick on the internet. So, but I think it's great if you want to talk with interesting people, create a platform, especially if you have a niche that's not like, I just talk to anybody I want about anything I want. You're kind of commoditizing yourself, so you better be freaking hilarious and also have access to a great roster of guests, things like that. But if you're like, I'm really good at marketing pet stores, this is the pet store marketing podcast, you can kill it because pet store owners across the United States and Canada are going to listen to the pet store ownership marketing podcast, and then you get sponsored from certain pet brands and things like that, and you can really make a living or add on to your living as a pet store owner doing that type of show. And so the niche is where it's at. But if you're trying to be like mass market, I never recommend it. You see certain comedians doing it, but you got to think, okay, this is a comedian that's built a following over 10, 15, 20 years. Now they're taking what's essentially a social media following or a Netflix following or both, and they can't tour anymore, so they're doing live shows on podcasts or live to tape shows on podcasts, and they're making their living that way. Great. But if you're just kind of coming up and you're like, I don't want to get a real job, I'm going to start a podcast, I don't recommend that at all, because I think starting just about any other type of business is going to be more lucrative and probably be faster.
Yeah, and one of the things that kind of makes me think about, the comedians is the charisma, and they're just conditioned to be great people that can entertain and interview. And I've heard in a lot of your interviews that the word come up, charisma, it just pops up all the time. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that a little bit. What is your definition of charisma just in general?
Definition of charisma, it's a tough one. I think you have to be able to engage people and make them feel interesting. That's really like one of the elements of charisma in any case. A lot of people think being charismatic is being loud or outgoing or opinionated or whatever it is. That may play a part. I think there's a quote, and I can't remember who it's from, but it's about Benjamin Disraeli. And it said something like, he went out with some woman back in the day, right? Like on a date or to dinner or something. And she said, when I went out with, I can't remember who it was, somebody like some famous British, let me look this up. I'm going to butcher it. So a woman once described the difference between meeting this leading Victorian English politician, or they're both actually leading Victorian English politicians, William Gladstone and Benjamin Disraeli. So it's like some 19th century stuff. Benjamin Disraeli is known as a super charismatic guy. They were both seeking election as the British Prime Minister. And she said, after attending a dinner with William Gladstone, I thought he was the most interesting person in the world, she said. However, after having dinner with Benjamin Disraeli, I thought I was the most interesting person in the world. So that's the difference between different types of charisma. Yes, somebody might be very charismatic and engaging, but the best kind of charisma is the type that makes the person interacting with you feel good, not just entertained. So the other person might have been like in awe, wow, they're so great, they're so entertaining, they're so charismatic. But when they feel great, they associate that with you, and therefore that's just an entirely different kind of infectious charisma, right?
Yeah, and it's about them. It makes them feel good. And I think we've all been in those situations at a social gathering where it's just kind of awkward and you do the small talk. But as soon as you get that individual talking about themselves, the doors are open, the floodgates are open for a conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's talk about networking a little bit. You talk about it on your shows. You have a 6-minute networking course on your website, and it's clearly something that you've been interested in since you were in the university. So what's the difference between networking and simply just giving someone your card at a party?
Yeah, so that's a great question as well, because a lot of people think networking is making yourself known. And it kind of goes to what we were talking about with charisma and being engaging. If a lot of people have my contact information, so what? But if I have the ability to call upon other people, especially a lot of them, for help with something or to get something, and they will pick up the phone, take my call, willingly help me without being prodded over and over again, that's a network, right? A network is when I can reach out and I don't have to go, hey, this is kind of weird, a little awkward, but would you mind maybe sharing this with your audience? That's not a great network, right? you having a bunch of people's information and marketing to them or asking them for something.
Right.
What you want is a network that wants to help you back, right? You're giving without the expectation of anything in return. That's how you build things like a network. So I'm constantly trying to introduce people to each other, strengthen network ties, re-engage people that I haven't talked to in a really long time. Keep up with people that I haven't talked to in ages, make sure that they're doing well, see if there's anything I can do for them, but of course, always connecting them to one another. That way, if I ever do need anything, I have people I can reach out to, of course, but also people around me are thinking, man, that Jordan guy, he's just a machine. He introduced me to this person and that person. Like, what a good person. I'm building referral currency, right? I might never cash it in, and that's great. Usually you're never going to, you could help 100 people and maybe 10 of them are able to ever do something for you, and it's fine. You shouldn't be keeping score. You shouldn't be doing things because of what's in it for you. Just keep giving without the attachment or expectation of getting anything in return, and you build a ton of referral currency. And that's a better way to live because it builds stronger relationships around you, and it helps with everything from, yes, being able to ask them to market your silly book, you know, that you come out with in a year, but also it helps protect your reputation. I heard from a friend recently, they said, hey, somebody said something about you about this, you know, you might want to straighten that out. And I go, oh, okay, thanks. So I texted the person, I said, hey, I heard there's a misunderstanding. And I ended up chatting with them. And they said, you know, what's funny? I talked with a couple people about this, and all of them said, you must be mistaken because Jordan would never do that. And I thought, that's a good network right there. A bunch of people said it couldn't possibly, the thing in question was someone had said, oh, I talked to him on the phone. He's arrogant. He's a jerk. And like this whole party, like the needle came off the record, and people said, no, I don't think so. Maybe you caught him in a bad mood, but I don't think so. I've known him for years. Oh, no, that's the guy. Hey, that guy introduced me to you. Oh, that guy, no, he did this thing for me. Oh, he did this other thing for me. Now he introduced me to this other person. And so this woman who had said that was like, huh, okay, well, whatever. That's unusual. And then it turned out that it was another person that had a similar name, and it wasn't me.
Wow.
And I thought, oh, how interesting, because you know, if you just kind of have like a lukewarm reputation with a bunch of folks, they just go, oh man, I heard this person doesn't like Jordan. Well, that's weird. But it was enough where people went, hey, just for what it's worth, I think you're probably wrong. And then another person said, yeah, I overheard that. I think you're probably wrong. You know, you don't get that from just being a nice guy once. You don't get that from being, you don't get from looking them in the eye and having a firm handshake, right? You get that from a consistent pattern of generous actions over a long period of time. And you get people sticking up for you and making your reputation travels in a way that's not even, you don't even have to do anything. And it's constantly reinforced. And then it's hard for somebody to say, hey, this guy screwed me over, and then have it actually damage you, because people literally won't even believe it.
They come to bat for you, your sphere of influence. That's amazing. And I think just for myself, and you can see it a mile away when it's a transactional type of situation.
Right.
Like, it's going to be awkward. Can you write me a review or whatever? Whereas if you help this individual out, they may be willing to, you don't even have to ask, and they're just going to reciprocate if they're aware of the situation.
Exactly.
So let's talk about personal injury attorneys there, that are wanting to create opportunities to network. What might be some just basic things that they could do? Obviously, it's a little bit different because of travel and kind of restrictions of coronavirus, but how might someone go about approaching networking, or is it as simple as just give and don't expect anything in return?
No, there are definitely techniques to this. I won't shamelessly plug my 6-minute networking thing unless you want me to. I can save it for the end. So it's a free course, so there's no upsells, so I don't really see the harm in it, but I always like to ask. It is at jordanharbinger.com/course. I have drills in there. I'll give you a couple right now. One, of course, that we talk about is that ABG, always be giving, which is that give without the expectation or attachment of anything in return. That's instead of ABC, always be closing. You've seen Glenn Ross, that movie? Yeah. So a lot of people think, what's in it for me? I'm always closing. And the analogy I give in this situation is this. Let's say we're at a party and I go, all right, I need a personal injury attorney because for some unfortunate reason. I walk into this party and I go, all right, I'm going to find a referral this way. And The first person I talk to, I say, "Hey, how you doing? Oh, hey, what's going on?" We start talking about what we do. She's a graphic designer. I immediately don't care. I'm bored. I'm looking over her shoulder. I excuse myself to go do something else. I go and I talk to a couple more people. None of them are personal injury attorneys. They don't know any personal injury attorneys. So then I move along and I'm just meeting a bunch of other, irrelevant professionals, and they're kind of going, "All right, I guess this guy didn't like us or something," right? I'm just sort of like not using those opportunities, and at worst probably making even not a great impression on those people either. Now I'm trying to find the needle in a haystack by looking for these referrals. On the other hand, if I'm ABG, right, because that's the ABC mindset, if I'm ABG, the first person I talk to is a graphic designer, I start thinking, okay, do I know anybody who needs graphic design? Hey, why don't you send me your portfolio? I'll keep it in my inbox just in case I ever need anyone who needs graphic design. And then sure, within the next 90 days, I might find somebody who needs a good graphic designer. And I say, hey, look, I've never worked with this woman. She's perfectly nice. I met her at a party. Here's her portfolio. It's full of good work. I know she's looking for clients. You want me to introduce you? Now I've helped this person I met at a party. I've helped this person who reached out to me for graphic design, or that I just heard about needing graphic design, or that I saw their website and it sucked and they need graphic design and I'm offering it to them, right? So I'm helping everybody, but it didn't cost me anything. And that interaction was not a waste. So I'm really looking at every interaction from the ABG mindset, realizing that most opportunities are over the horizon, right? I don't know who I'm going to be able to help, and I don't know who's going to be able to help me. So I have to treat every new person that I meet as a potential opportunity. And if you don't do that and you blow everyone off until you need them, you make a bad impression, and your list of contacts is really tiny. Because what happens in a week when I go, oh man, my website's down and this thing is ugly and you're right, I should redesign it. I need a graphic designer. And I go, crap, I don't even remember who that woman was. I never even got her contact information. Maybe I can ask someone else at the party. Oh, crap, nobody knows who she is. Oh, well, back to the drawing board. Now I go to the next party and all I'm meeting are personal injury attorneys, right? So it's like, I can't really, you can't win unless you have that broad, diverse network, and you keep that network up by reaching out to people through drills and exercises and by introducing them to one another. And one of my favorite drills is called Connect 4. Every morning I grab my phone, I go to the bottom of my text messages all the way down. That's where those dead threads are, where it's like, hey, we had lunch in 2017 at Cafe Gratitude in San Diego after some financial conference we were speaking at. And I never really kept in touch with you. How are you? Those are the kind of those are the kind of people that are weak and dormant ties in your network. Like, they know who you are. They've heard your name before or something, but you didn't really become friends. Like, you're just a weird sort of very third degree acquaintance, I guess you'd say it. Not even, right? And so those people know who you are, but you're not really keeping up with them. Or somebody I had on my podcast 3 years ago, right? We're not tight. I lost track of them. These weak and dormant ties. I like to re-engage 4 of those people each day. That's why I call the drill Connect 4, because it's easy to remember, and you do 4 a day. And I take weekends off because a lot of people they're not with their family. They're not going to respond in time. And let's say I get a 50% response rate. That's 10 new people per week that I've re-engaged that I may have never heard from them ever again in my life. And now those people and I are in an informal conversation, might only last 2 or 3 text messages. It doesn't matter. And usually then I add those people into my CRM and I say, hey, every 6 months, remind me to reach out to this person and see how they're doing. That's it. And now I'm top of mind for them, and they're in my CRM or my Rolodex. And in my CRM system, I use connectionfox.com. I can save their information. Like, I might put your information in there and say, like, personal injury attorney, and then your geographic area, and then like met at such and such conference. So then when I'm looking to either go to a city or someone reaches out to me from a city or they're moving to that city, I go, okay, who do I know in Biloxi? Oh, I know these 3 people. One's an attorney, the other one's an accountant. Hey, I know 3 people out there. They're pretty nice. You want me to introduce you? You're moving out there, or you're looking for a job out there. Now I have this sort of ready-made go-to network that I can use to introduce to people. And I've re-engaged these weak and dormant ties. It doesn't take a lot of time. This is time I'd be wasting on Instagram. Now I put them in Connection Fox. I can search for them, and I'm basically staying in touch with them once or twice a year via email or text, because they pop up in my CRM. So I'm top of mind, they're top of mind, we're back in touch, and you see all these cool opportunities shake out of that. You know, I can't even, I think not a week goes by really where somebody will call me and say, hey, do you do keynote speaking, or do you do this kind of consulting, or do you do this kind of event or anything like that? Do you do any of this? And I'll say, yeah, you know, how did you think of me? Well, you know, we texted a couple months back, and then I thought, like, who do I know that does podcasting? And so, yeah, I'm going into a sales meeting now, and I'm going to have to throw a couple names in the hat for a keynote, and you're top of mind. And I just think, am I about to get a $15,000 keynote speech from doing in my freaking underwear in a Zoom call because I texted this person 3 months ago and now I'm top of mind? And that kind of thing happens a lot. And how many of those do you need to happen in a year for it to be worth it to spend 4 minutes a day texting people that you've lost track of over the years, right? Once, maybe once every other year for that to be ROI positive and in return for your time. I mean, you really don't need to have too many jackpots for it to be worth spending your Instagram time or water cooler time re-engaging weak and dormant ties. So I highly recommend that drill to everyone.
I think that's amazing. And one of the things that kind of popped in my mind is even in that situation where maybe you weren't the right fit for the keynote, and then you could pass it to someone else in your network, and then they may have a different opportunity for you. So it's all kind of, I was thinking of, I don't know the exact saying, but it's like the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon or something like that. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, where you say like, okay, some movie, and then you have to name an actor in each movie that was in a movie with another actor until you get to Kevin Bacon. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's an amazing tip. That would be something that you could start the day off with. You get in that hobby, it compounds over time, and that's easy to do, right? You got your cell phone. So I love that. That's really actionable. And, so we've talked a lot about your career, and we've gotten to know a little bit about the man behind the podcast. And I kind of wanted to shift to personal a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you seem to constantly be in evolution, and you've had the previous 2 podcasts. So what's next for Jordan Harbinger?
Yeah, I'm scaling the Jordan Harbinger Show. I've got a great variety of guests. Like this coming week, let's see, we've got some great people. Today, or the other day, I should say, we had Billy McFarland, who is the Firefest guy who did the interview live from prison. He got thrown in solitary confinement for doing the podcast with me via the phone, so that got all kinds of international press. It's the only media he's done since going to prison, so that was kind of a cool world exclusive for me to get. Next week, I've got a mafia enforcer. A couple weeks after that, I've got a jewel thief. I've got a lot of scientists coming on. We've got Seth Godin coming on again. I've got Steve Schwartzman, who's one of the wealthiest men in the world from Blackstone, the founder of Blackstone, coming on. Just got a lot of really interesting folks. I like to have that diversity of thought, something that the audience can use really in every episode. And I'm scaling. I'm trying to grow the show and grow it and grow it and grow it. One, because we're stuck inside with COVID and there's not a whole hell of a lot else going on, right? I've got a 1-year-old who's walking around, but he can't even go outside the house for more than a few minutes before wanting to go home and being hungry and wanting to go to bed, which is great. And so, it's a great time to sort of like watch my kid grow up and scale the business so that when he is 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I can take a month off every quarter and do stuff with him and travel and go out and hang out or retire early or something like that. Like now's the time for me to really grow things wide and get a huge footprint so that later on, I'm not doing, like my dad worked really hard, not to get too personal, but my dad worked really hard for Ford Motor Company, and my mom worked really hard. She was a public school teacher. So like they were gone a lot. I was a latchkey kid. I don't fault them for that. They were awesome parents, but my goal is to not be a dad who comes home at 7 o'clock an hour before I have to go to bed, or 8 o'clock an hour before I go to bed, and is cranky because he's been at work for 12 hours or 14 hours, in order to make enough money to send me to college. Like, I don't want to do that to my kid. And I also think that there's something to be said for quality of life. And my parents weren't really thinking about that. They were more like, you better work hard and save or you're going to get screwed. They had kind of a scarcity mindset around that because they grew up poor. And so I think I'm in a distinctly different position. So I want to scale, get some financial security, be able to retire, then be doing the show because I love it, which I do. And then the second I don't, just be like, I'm done, right? If that ever happens, or just be able to work half as much and make twice as much. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And I think that you're creating almost a legacy. All your content, the people that you've talked to, I just imagine your kid when he grows up that he's going to get to hear his dad and all these fantastic, entertaining, interesting individuals that you've talked to, and just the stories that you'll have to share with them. So that's amazing. So basically, is so maintaining work-life balance right now, is it more just like putting in the OT, getting a lot of podcasts out, and kind of then trying to throttle back a little bit later?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I'll probably keep going as long as I can with, I do 3 shows a week. I put out a lot of content. I'm probably going to keep that pace up, but there's going to be a time at which I take a month off or 2 months off, or just end up hiring a lot of different things out in order to do less of what I don't want to do. I already should be doing more of that, candidly, but there's a lot of things that I'm doing right now because I'm learning the process, not because I have to do it, like ad buys and marketing and things like that. You can hire for that, but I want to know the job inside out, because I've hired plenty of people before for various roles, and they go, oh, this is really complex. Oh, I can't really do it. Ooh, this is going to take me 2 weeks. And then I learn it myself, and I do it in 20 minutes, and I go, oh, I was being scammed the whole time. All right, well, so now I learn everything that I can about every job that I can before I hire, because otherwise that information disparity is what leads you to hire somebody who takes you for a ride or tells you that they need 3 days to do something when they really need 3 hours because they just don't want to work hard. And I need to be able to call BS on that, and come up with systems to work things. Plus, you'd be surprised. I mean, I'm sure you've seen this in your own business. There's ways that people do things and you go, well, this takes this long. Everybody says this takes this long. And then you do it yourself and you go, what if we just don't do X, Y, Z? Well, I guess we could do it that way. Okay, but it takes a quarter of the time when we don't do that. Why is everyone doing that? Well, that's the way we've always done it. Okay, so let's just change the way we do it, save ourselves 50% of the effort and, 50% of the expense. And like, I find things like that all the time where I go, why are we doing this on paper? Well, it's what we're used to. Okay, I'm going to computerize this, and let me tell you, if you don't get used to it, you just don't have to work here anymore. And they're like, oh, and then 2 months later, wow, I wish we'd done this earlier. Everything's so great. I can look it up on my phone. And I'm like, oh gosh, why do we do this? It's
right.
Especially because I come from like a radio background, and there's people who I work with that have come from a radio background, and they spend 20 years, 30 years selling radio ads. And I go, stop emailing me spreadsheets, put up a Google Doc, throw it in NetSuite or whatever sort of like back end. I want to be able to see this in real time. And they're just like, I don't know how to do that. And I'm like, cool, we'll get a new job, and like overnight, suddenly it's not so hard. And, it's like, you just sort of feel like you're bringing some of these old businesses and business practices into the 21st century. And so that's why I end up doing too much work myself, because I'm doing 5 people's jobs. And it's fun right now, but it's not going to be fun when my kid's like, Dad, why do you never come to my soccer games? You know what I mean? So I've got to figure that out now before I hand it off to someone else.
Yeah, and the one thing that is, once you do all these different tactics, marketing tactics, strategies, whatever you're doing, you'll be able to understand who's actually competent. So that's the thing. When you don't have some level of competence, you can't even evaluate theirs. And the other thing I was thinking about is you mentioned this at the very beginning about niching for your podcast. And I was just thinking, one thing is, well, when you niche for just, working with personal injury attorneys, keyword research, I've already done that. Mm-hmm. And so there's efficiencies in niching. And I just think that everything you're saying just resonates for any industry, any individual. And, Jordan, we'd like to close up with a new segment called our 3 for 3. It's just a quick fire round. So
Sure.
Go from your gut. And the first one, it's a marketing question. So what is your top search engine optimization tip?
Ooh, SEO. So this is maybe not what you want. Let me know. I know a lot about Google because I have a lot of friends that work there, and they're constantly trying to figure out how to bring high value content to people that use Google. So trying to figure out how to like stuff keywords at the bottom of your website like people used to do in the 90s, they're on to you, right? And every time you try and game the system like that, bear in mind that some of the most brilliant people in the entire world are all here in Silicon Valley trying to figure out how to not make that work anymore and find some other way where putting out great content and high value stuff bubbles to the top. So the trick for me is put out a lot of really good high value content that people really like, and that I don't have to be like, ooh, my meta tags aren't right, because Google is moving towards, hey, let's just figure out what great content looks like with AI and machine learning, and away from, oh, you forgot brackets on that thing. Okay, well, we're not going to index your site and it's going to break, and we're going to put this other guy before you who has a robot, customizing all the metadata on his pages.
100% agree. It's Google's job to eliminate crap and to serve the best consumer experience. So next one up, which entrepreneur, and you've interviewed a lot of them, which entrepreneur do you admire the most?
Ooh, that's tricky. It's really hard because, there's a lot of really brilliant young entrepreneurs out there and not so young entrepreneurs out there. I would say it is really, really tough to do because there's a lot of people that have a social good component to what they do. And there's a lot of people that could make a lot more money than they are if they stopped trying to save the world or something like that. So I got to say, it's going to be somebody like Malala Yousafzai or somebody like that who, if you don't know who she is, she was attacked by the Taliban, got shot in the face. Now she has a nonprofit for education and women and things like that. And I think that's really brave because, one, people literally tried to kill her. They still want to kill her. She's a symbol of essentially oppressed women standing up to the cruelest of human beings around the world, and paid a huge price for it, won a Nobel Prize, and then went to college a few years later because she's 18. That's an amazing person. I don't even know if you can consider it an entrepreneur, but I feel like it counts. Yeah. Absolutely.
And final question here. So what is the next thing on your bucket list?
I need a freaking vacation, man. I want to go to the Italian coast and drink strong coffee and eat pasta and gain 9 pounds sitting on a balcony eating fettuccine Alfredo with prawns in it or something. I'm a simple man. I just need to get out of the house for 2 days, anywhere.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it too. Hey, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show, and it's been awesome speaking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.